All right, here we go with the Roman Empire. This is lesson 7-2. And we start with a picture of a Roman triumph. There's like a parade. And it says, then the captured weapons passed. There were bronze helmets, shields, and glittering steel swords piled on wagons. Then followed 3,000 men carrying 750 trays heaped with silver coins. Next came the king's small children, now slaves, and the king himself in a dark robe. Some in the crowd wept for the children, but not for the king. Suddenly, our great consul himself in a golden chariot. The crowd broke into a roar. It was he who had brought all this wealth and glory to Rome. Rome's armies brought much wealth and glory to Rome in the years after Augustus came to power. Remember, he's the first emperor. When these armies returned to Rome, they were greeted with a magnificent parade known as a triumph. Ruling an empire. When Augustus came to power after Caesar's death, Roman control had already spread far beyond Italy. Under Augustus and the emperors who followed, Rome gained an even greater empire. Look at the map again. We saw it before. It's still there. And it's about to grow too. The Roman Empire stretched from Britain, which is, you can't see it on this map. So Britain would be up here. So it stretched from Britain. Oh, you can kind of see it in this map here. This is better. This is broken up by province. So you can see the Latin, which is Roman, right? Names of the provinces from the Roman Empire. All right, so it stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia. Rome controlled all the lands around the Mediterranean. This gave the Romans great pride. In fact, they called the Mediterranean Mar Nostrum, which in Latin means our sea. Augustus, the Senate, and the people. Augustus was an intelligent ruler. When he was struggling for power, he often ignored the Senate and its laws. However, after he won control, he changed his manner. He showed great respect for the Senate and was careful to avoid acting like a king, which is the one thing they were trying to avoid all along. He did not want to have the same fate as his uncle, Julius Caesar. Augustus often said that he wanted to share power with the Senate. He even said he wanted to restore the Republic. He was just leading them to it. He's going to rule until they're ready to go back to that. But what really happened was quite different. The Senate and the people of Rome were so grateful for Rome's peace and prosperity that they gave Augustus all the power he wanted. Governing conquered peoples. Now we see a little bit better map of the Roman Empire. They've gained a little bit more land in the process of going from a republic to an empire. So how do you govern all of those peoples? Let's see. The Romans treated their conquered peoples wisely. The Romans took some slaves after a conquest, but most of the conquered people remained free. To govern, they divided their empire into areas called a province, which is an area of land led by a governor and supported by an army. Okay, so it's a big empire, but it's broken up into provinces. Each province has a governor, and the governor has an army behind him. Often the Romans built a city in their new province to serve as its capital. Now here we see a lot of them, and they're given Roman names for those places. So it's kind of cool to see Britannica or Britannia. And we have, you can't see it, it's too far away. Thracia, I know, is probably there. Macedonia is probably there. Egyptus for Egypt, I'm sure, is there. Generally, the Romans didn't force their way of life on conquered peoples. So they kind of took a book from the Persian Empire, which was kind of like, we're here, we've conquered, carry on. That's kind of how the Romans went about their way as well. They allowed the people to follow their own religions. Local rulers were allowed to stay in power. Think about that for a minute. And run the daily affairs of their governments. As long as there was peace, the Roman governors didn't interfere with the lives of the conquered peoples. Rather, they kept watch over them. Rome wanted peaceful provinces that would supply it with the raw materials it needed. So they got something out of it, right? They also wanted the conquered people to buy Roman products and pay taxes. So really they're looking for the people to be peaceful and to pay their taxes. And as long as they did those things, they, typically speaking, there are lots of exceptions to this rule, but for the most part, most of Roman Empire, the history of the Roman Empire, they left the peoples to their business. Okay. That said, so peaceful and pay taxes, we got that. Many of the conquered people adopted Roman ways still. Many learned to speak Latin, which is the language of the Romans. They also many people chose to worship Roman gods, but the empire didn't force or expect them to do this. So let's talk about 5 good emperors. Augustus died in the year 14. For 82 years after his death, Roman history was a story of the good, the bad, and the terrible emperors. 2 of the worst were Caligula and Nero. They both may have been insane. Caligula was an emperor who proclaimed himself as a god and appointed his favorite horse as a consul. Thought his horse would do a better job than those other guys. Nero was an emperor who murdered his brother and his mother and his wife. So there's that. Then in the year 96, Rome entered what is called the Age of the 5 Good Emperors. Only the last of these emperors had a son, which we'll read about momentarily. The Roman Empire was originally against the idea of a dynasty, so they weren't passing along the crown to the next son or whomever. Instead, each of the emperors adopted the best young man he could find to be the next emperor. So they kind of groomed the next person that they thought would do a good job. Perhaps the greatest emperor was Hadrian. Hadrian worked hard to build a good government in the Roman Empire. His laws protected women and children and slaves. He issued a code of laws so that all laws were the same throughout the empire. Hadrian reorganized the army so that soldiers were allowed to defend their home provinces instead of having to travel to fight for other people. They didn't even know. This gave soldiers a greater sense of responsibility. Hadrian also encouraged learning throughout the empire. I want you to remember that part about the military, because that is going to be part of Rome's downfall in the end. They actually make it a law that you have to do the opposite of that, and things fall apart. People didn't, weren't willing to fight as hard for the other peoples. All right, this is kind of a paragraph I've added in here, so take of it what you will. But the statue here is of Marcus Aurelius, the last of the 5 good emperors. In this stone sculpture, he pardons the barbarians whose attacks weakened the Roman Empire. He pardons them afterward. Aurelius worked closely with a man named Verus. So here was the plan. If Aurelius should die, Verus would become emperor. Another man, Pertinax, would rule if they both should die. But unfortunately, they were constantly at war with their Germanic tribe called the Goths, and all 3 of them eventually died. This left Aurelius' son Commodus in charge of the Roman Empire after their deaths. Aurelius would not have wanted Commodus to be king, to be emperor. He didn't trust his son to make good decisions for the people, but it was too late. Like his father thought, Commodus spent his time at the Coliseum watching gladiator battles. He didn't take his job seriously, and he spent a lot of the empire's money on his own enjoyment. This ended the Age of the 5 Good Emperors. So let's switch over and talk about Latin for a minute, because I keep mentioning it, but we haven't really talked about it. The Romans spoke Latin. That was their language. The Latin language is a source of today's French and Italian and Spanish and Portuguese and Romanian languages. half of all English words are from Latin origin. Some came directly from Latin, like legal and computer and library. Others came into the English language when the English were invaded by France in 1066. So at that point, they added some. So the French, remember, Gaul was a French province, and so there were people there that spoke Latin, and then they invaded Britain years later, and the English started using Latin as well, and parts of Latin with their other languages. And so, yeah, it all spreads. The Greek influence on Rome. The Romans had long admired Greek achievements. People said that Hadrian spoke better Greek than he spoke Latin. Marcus Aurelius wrote a famous book of philosophy in Greek called Meditations. It's great. I highly recommend it. Romans visited Greece to study Greek art, architecture, and ideas about the government. There was a major difference between Greek and Roman views of learning, however. The Greeks were interested in ideas, right? Talked a lot about the Greeks thinking about things, but the Romans wanted to do things. I'm going to stop because my computer's about to run out of battery. I'm just going to plug it in real quick. I don't want to lose power while we are recording. All right. So this says the Greeks were interested in ideas. They sought to learn truths about the world through reason, right? That sounds just like them. They developed studies like mathematics and philosophy and astronomy, which is the study of the stars and the planets. But remember, we said that they didn't actually experiment to see if their theories were true. You're just thinking. The Romans were more interested in using Greek ideas and these studies to build things. Under the Romans, architecture and engineering blossomed. With these skills, they built their empire. So we think of like the Greeks as the dreamers and the Romans as the doers. Architecture and technology, just some clear examples here. This is the Pantheon in Rome. It's a building. Talk about momentarily. Built during the reign of Emperor Hadrian, the Pantheon was first used to hold statues of the Roman gods. Later, it became a Christian church. Today, it serves as a burial place for many famous Italians. At its highest point, the Pantheon's majestic dome rises 144 feet above the floor. Light streams in through an opening at the top of the dome. Early Roman art and architecture copied the Etruscans. Later, the Romans studied and copied Greek sculpture and architecture. However, Roman statues and buildings were heavier and they're stronger in style than that of the Greeks. Using arches, Romans were able to build larger structures. They could create large open spaces inside buildings with side arched ceilings supported by heavy walls. Most large buildings were built of bricks covered with thin slabs of white marble. However, one important development was a new building material called concrete. Concrete was a mix of stone and sand and cement and water, and it dries as hard as a rock. Concrete helped the Romans build buildings. Helped the Romans build. Create buildings that were far taller than any built before. The greatest Roman structure was the Coliseum, a giant arena that held 50,000 spectators. Its walls were so well built that the floor of the arena could be flooded for mock naval battles using real people in boats. Stairways and ramps ran through the buildings. There were even elevators to carry wild animals from dens below to the floor of the arena, like pulled on a rope. The pulley's been invented, it's fine. There's just a picture of a Roman road because we want to talk about those. Roman engineers built roads from Rome to every part of the empire. The road system covered a distance equal to twice the distance around the Earth at the equator. Two times around the Earth's equator. That's how many Roman roads there were. Do you know the saying, all roads lead to Rome? Or Downey's Toyota or something. In Roman times, it was true. No matter where you were in the empire, no matter where you started out, you would eventually be looped back around to the city of Rome. Milestones were placed along Roman roads. Each was marked with the number of miles to the city of Rome. So if you were heading out from the city, you'd have many miles to go on that road before you looped back around and got to Rome. But the mile markers were all about Rome. A Roman mile was 1,000 paces, and each pace was 2 steps long, which is about 5 feet. Romans were also famous for their aqueducts. Oh, I wish I'd put in a picture of an aqueduct. Aqueducts are structures that carry water over long distances. The aqueducts were huge lines of arches, often many miles long. A channel along the top carried water from the countryside to the city so that they would have fresh water. Roman aqueducts tunneled through mountains and spanned valleys, and some are still being used today in Europe. If you visit Europe today, you might see these arches going through the countryside, and those were built by the Romans. That was their way of getting water from the countryside to the cities. Roman law. Roman law followed Roman roads throughout the empire. The great Roman senator Cicero, yeah, expressed Roman feelings about the law. Cicero stated, "What sort of thing is the law? Is it the kind of thing that cannot be bent by influence, or broken by power, or spoiled by money?" Okay, I asked that as a question, but it is a statement. It is the kind of thing. It can't be bent by influence, it can't be broken by power, and it can't be spoiled by money. The law is the law. That's what Cicero believed. Later, a ruler named Justinian used Roman law to create a famous code of justice. Here are just a few lines from that law code. Justinian stated, "No one suffers a penalty for what he thinks. No one may be forcibly removed from his own home. The burden of proof is upon the person who accuses. In inflicting penalties, the age and inexperience of the guilty party must be taken into account." Roman law continued to be passed down to other cultures, including our own. Just think of our Bill of Rights. Do any of Justinian's laws appear there? Yep. Other Roman ideas of justice are also basic to our system of laws. For example, persons accused of crime had the right to face their accusers, which they still are today. If there was doubt about a person's guilt, he or she should be judged innocent. There are a few court cases that Cicero was lawyer to, where he defended some pretty bad people who did some awful things. So it wasn't always judged innocent, but. All right. So Chapter 7, Section 2 notes. Your 2 vocabulary words are province and aqueduct. Your place is Coliseum. Your people are Caligula, Nero, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius. I tried to balance the good and the bad and the terrible. And then we have 4 fill in the blanks. The Roman Senate gave Augustus all the power he wanted because they were grateful for Rome's what and what. Happy times. Unlike the Greeks who were interested in ideas, the Romans were more interested in. Roman law was based on the idea of, and Romans were tolerant of other religions throughout the empire as long as the conquered people did what 2 things. All right, good luck with that.